Hi guys, and welcome to another video on my channel, and we have got today the Feiyu-Tech SPG Live 3-axis stabilized handheld gimbal for smartphones. So a first for my channel. Every single gimbal review that I've done so far has been all around action cameras, specifically the GoPro Hero, and this is the first time that I've got a gimbal that actually operates using a phone. So the phone is your camera, the phone is the thing that gets stabilized. I like the concept of this. Everyone has a mobile phone these days, and most of them have got half decent cameras on them, so it makes sense to kind of have that so you can carry around your gimbal, and if you wanted to get some stabilized video shots, you could just pull your gimbal out and then you could slot your phone onto it and then you could get some good footage with it. So not a bad idea, plenty of them out on the market. Feiyu-Tech have done some, Zion have done some, DJI have the Osmo Mobile, which I do own, and I will be doing a review of that soon as well. Hopefully I'll get some more on the channel as well to compare some of this. And indeed, Feiyu-Tech, this is by no means their first ever one. They've been doing this for quite a while. They've got the SPG Live, they've got the SPG, so they've got different variants of them. This one being the Live means that it's got kind of a portrait mode. I'll go into more details on that later, but for the moment let's just get this thing out of the box and we'll take a look at what we get. Okay, so nice and simple and straightforward, but nicely packaged as always. We have got the warranty card, chuck that, silicone gel, chuck that. We have got counterweights, so a nice heavy counterweight there, and a either a shim or maybe part of a weight as well, which means it's going to be balanced via counterweights, no surprise there. We've then got in the box a battery, exactly the same as the one on the Summon, no doubt. Yep, 22650, 3000 milliamp, 3.7 volt, and we've also got a micro USB cable, so no surprises there. Much like the Summon that was I've reviewed recently, it doesn't have a charger, so it doesn't have a separate standalone charger. You will literally just plug the cable into the device with the battery inside it and it will charge from that point on. So let's now get this package out of here. Not sure what customs would think when you turn up with that through your X-ray machine, but fingers crossed that won't cause any problems. This is a nice neoprene feel. It's got a bit of sponginess to it, a bit of padding, nice branded red kind of zip to it, and it also has a clasp there, so you could attach a carabiner, put it on your belt or something like that to carry it around. Highly unlikely that this thing is going to fit the mobile phone on it inside this sock, but still a nice way of carrying it without getting it damaged. And there we go, there is the device itself. So immediate impression is that it has got an identical base. That entire section here is identical to the Summon. I can prove that point right now. There is the Summon, and as you can see, if I hold them side by side, they are spot on identical. So they've both got this kind of flattened joystick, which I wasn't a massive fan of on the Summon, it has to be said. Getting a bit more used to it now, but yeah, still would prefer the standard joystick that they had on the G4S. And then you've got a shutter button, the on-off button / function buttons, the joystick, and then you've got the LED, so the status LED. So nothing complicated there. And again, much like the Summon, you've also got in the bottom a nice 1/4 inch thread tripod mount there. You've got the external thread there, which means you can mount a carbon fiber extension pole, or many third-party extension poles that are going around now that you can actually pull out. And then you've got on the side of it micro USB port with the little rubber housing. There it is there. And we've also got another 1/4 inch thread there, so that's another tripod mount. Usual Feiyu-Tech process in terms of keeping all the wires out of the way, which is really nice to see. Good solid feel. They do feel quality, I have to admit. You know, they may not feel quite as quality as something like a DJI Osmo, but I have to say they do feel pretty good to actually hold them. So all in all, quite impressed by the build quality of it. Let's see how this thing goes together. So you can see there is no special device for actually lengthening this arm. So again, DJI and also the SPG from Feiyu-Tech, they have a little clasp that you unscrew, and that allows you to pull the arm out, which means you can balance it using that. This is using weights by the looks of it. This comes undone. We'll go into that later on in this video. And in terms of holding the phone on, we have got what I would imagine, yep, good old-fashioned springs. Pretty stiff. Don't think that's going to be having any phones fall out of it, certainly there. And we've also got this little hole. Now this little hole here is actually quite interesting because it means that with a couple of bumpers that I believe Feiyu-Tech are bringing out, which are ultimately just a bit of polystyrene, you could make them yourself, but it means you can fit a action camera like a GoPro on here and you still be able to see a decent portion of the screen for shooting. So nice to see that they've considered that, at least. Whether it was by accident or whether it was deliberate, who knows, but it is certainly going to be an option. I'm not going to demonstrate on this video, but maybe in future videos I might give that a go. So what I'll do very quickly, we'll just see how that mounting system works, because I could see that being, it's quite stiff. Okay, now granted this is quite a big case, it goes in there pretty well, and yeah, definitely solid, so no problems there. Removing it, I can see that being a bit of a pain because you can't easily stretch this out. Yeah, and sure enough, it is indeed a pain. You get your fingers trapped, quite a pinch that is, so you just be careful there, but ultimately it's going to hold your phone safe, so that's probably a better thing than getting a bit of a pinch when you actually release it. But all in all, yep, quite impressed with the build quality, everything that I expected from this really. So let's get on to the rest of the review. Okay, so move to a different angle. So we've got the gimbal in front of us here and just a little bit of a backdrop. That's just the gimbal box and a G4S with a GoPro in it right behind us there. So we've got something to pan forward to look at in a moment. So all we need to do now is we need to get the phone fitted. I'm going to be using the iPhone 6. You can see it's in a fairly thick and fairly heavy and rather cheap and nasty rugged case. Every single video I've seen of these gimbals so far always just have the phone outside the case. Now personally, I don't think that's a real world test. Many people don't use their iPhone or their normal Android phone outside of a case. They always have a case. I personally use my iPhone 7, which is my current phone, in this rather nice Blasson armoured case, and I also used to certainly use a Ottobox, which is a big Ottobox Defender. So I wanted to do a real world test. Now first and foremost, spoiler alert, this fits absolutely fine. The iPhone 7 in a big case like this fits fine, and indeed the iPhone 6 in a much thicker Ottobox case also fitted. So no doubt this is going to go in, so I'll show you how to get that fitted. Firstly, what you want to do is of course note where your camera is, and we want the camera to be on the furthest outside. So now we just slide the clamps open and a bit of a squeeze, but it goes in nonetheless. There we go. So that is the phone fitted, and as you can see immediately it's all flopping to one side. Now we need to get this balance. That's the first thing you have to do with any of these gimbals. Two things you get in the box: you get a little washer, a fairly weighty washer, and a proper counterbalance weight as well. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to take the standard knurled nut off here, so you can see that is literally just a empty hollow piece of aluminium, and there's a little thread on top here, and what we're going to do is we're going to take our counterweight, the heavy one, and I'm just going to bung that on there. I'm not going to bother using the washer. There we go. So we put that on there, and you can see immediately now it's gone the other way. It's too far balanced on the weight of the weight side, and it needs to be further over to the phone side. Now this is where you have to have a little bit of a kind of a forward and backwards momentum, because you now need to move the phone slightly. So I'm just going to slide the phone out, maybe a little bit further than that, so there's going to be a bit of a gap, and as you can see that's getting much closer. I'm even going to go a little bit further, and there we go. So that is now pretty much balanced. You can see the phone flops forward. That's not a major problem. It's kind of expected to do that anyway, but the key is keeping this horizon as level as possible. So you've got a bit of a gap here, not a major problem. Again, you don't have any connection in there, so it's not an issue. It's just a little bit of a faff to have to do this if you're moving it in and out of your gimbal often, so just bear that in mind. So with that now in, all we need to do now is power it on and look at some of the various features in the settings. So we'll kick off with just the basic functions. Nothing has changed particularly. This is very similar to the way that the Summon worked, the way the G4S worked. So all we need to do is we first power it on, and you'll see it kicks into life. Now all we can do here, if we want to, we can just go into the standard iPhone camera app, or if you're using an Android phone, you just go into the normal camera app, and you can see you get nice stabilized footage. So it's holding the horizon. So just like the G4S and the Summon alike, the default mode that it goes into is kind of horizon lock. That is to say that if I were to try and pan forward, the camera will not do so. It's holding the horizon. So that's its default mode. If we wanted it so the horizon would actually move when we tilt the gimbal forward, we just simply double tap the function button. So we just pick it up and go tap tap. And now, as you can see, if I wanted to look at the bottom of this box in front of us, all I've got to do is tilt the gimbal forward and it will do it. Fairly basic and working perfectly well. We've also got the lock mode, so that is a single push. Now it doesn't matter what mode you're in, but if I was to move forward, look at the bottom of this box and single tap, what that now means is if I try and move the gimbal around, it's completely locked. It's looking at that point in space and it won't move at all. The only way I can get it back out is to do a single tap, and that will go into single tap mode. Obviously that means that the horizon has not come back. Double tap and the horizon will come back. You can also do 4 taps and that will actually reset it, so that will put it back into the mode that it was in originally. That's kind of the on-off reset mode. Now the triple tap, that will do a selfie. So if I go 1 2 3, you'll see the whole camera will swing around and that allows you to do a selfie. Obviously on a cell phone / mobile phone, that's not going to be really needed. You've got the front facing camera, so if your camera doesn't have a front facing camera, sorry, your phone doesn't have a front facing camera, you use that option. Most phones these days do, so you're probably not going to be using this too much, but you may find that the selfie camera isn't as good as this one and you would prefer to choose to use that. So it's nice to have that option in there. And again, if I wanted to reset this, I can do 4 taps, 1 2 3 4, and it will swing back round. So they are literally the basic modes of it. Now fortunately this gimbal is much more complex with that. It's got Bluetooth, you can make it talk to the phone, you can make the shutter button, the little red spot, you can actually turn that into the shutter button for your camera, which is a nice feature. But also Feiyu-Tech have given some consideration to the competition. They've come up with an app called Feiyu ON and also a Feiyu-Settings app, which allows you to adjust and tweak settings within the gimbal, and it also allows you to do things like the Feiyu ON app allows you to do things like face tracking, time-lapse, panoramics, and a few functions like that. So they're a little bit complicated to get into. I found a lot of problems, it has to be said, when I was trying to do this first off, but I'll show you exactly what you need to do to get into those modes, so it will be of use to people who have had the struggles that I have had. Unfortunately, the literature and the videos that Feiyu-Tech have released are bordering on completely wrong, and it is a bit of a struggle to get into, but when you do it right, it does work, and I'll show you those features now. So the first mode that I'm going to show you is the standard pairing mode. Now this is just literally connecting the device with your phone via Bluetooth, and what that will allow you to do is to use your shutter button on the Feiyu-Tech gimbal as the camera shutter on your phone. All it literally does is it links the shutter button to the plus button on your volume control. So you have to make sure that your volume control controls your shutter on your camera app, and then it will work. You'll know when it's working because if you're not in the camera app, it will basically turn your volume up on your phone. So to do that, very simple, all we need to do is we have to turn the gimbal on. Gimbal's now on. We now go to settings, we head to Bluetooth, and down the bottom of the list we will see there is a Feiyu-Tech device, Feiyu SPG. Do I want to pair? Yes. And I'm now connected, so it says that I'm connected to it. Fantastic. So we'll come out of that and then we can go into camera, and we should find that if I zoom down on this GoPro, and there we go, using the joystick, if I want to take a picture, all I need to do is press the shutter button, so that is the red spot there. So I'm going to press that and we should see it take a picture. And sure enough it does. And just to demonstrate what I mean is that if I come out of the camera and I press the shutter button, you'll see it turns my ringer up because it's basically controlling the volume control of it. So that's the very, very basic. So if you don't want to use the Feiyu-Tech app at all, then you can just basically use the camera app, and you can actually just connect it via your shutter button and you can control your camera like that. Very simple. Now if you want to use the Feiyu ON app and if you want to use the Feiyu-Settings app, it gets much more complicated. It's not rocket science, but unfortunately the literature has been really poorly written, and it's quite a struggle to get it working exactly how you want it. The key being that in this mode, when you've got your shutter button working, you are in HID mode, human interface device mode. What you have to do is you have to turn all of those modes off, you have to unpair the device, you have to forget the device, and then you have to reboot the gimbal into what is known as app mode. Now when you do that, interestingly, you have to have your Bluetooth turned on, but when you're in app mode, it will automatically see the gimbal without actually doing any pairing. So you aren't paired via Bluetooth, but it still sees it and it still functions. All a little bit confusing to explain, but I'll show you what I mean by that right now. Okay, so starting from where we were, so we actually had the device paired. To use the app mode, we have to actually make it forget it. So to do that, the gimbal is currently in standby mode at the moment. It can be turned on or in standby mode, but you'll see that we've got the connected device is right there. Now what we have to do is we have to actually go into it. Go into the right one. There we go. And SPG Live, go into the info, and we have to forget device. And choose yes. And now we've forgotten the device. Now we have to turn the Bluetooth off. And now let's make sure the gimbal is off. So to do that, we just hold the function button, you get the blinking red, and everything's off. So everything's gone completely floppy and Bluetooth is turned off. So what we can now do is we can turn Bluetooth on the phone back on. And then, most importantly, to get into app mode, what you have to do is you have to hold the joystick up, so you pull it all the way to the top and hold the button until you see the green light. Okay. So very simple in that respect, and what you'll notice is that we're still in the Bluetooth options here, and what you'll notice is that the device doesn't actually show up, so it's not transmitting in the same way as it was before in terms of Bluetooth. You can also see that the device is appearing here, not connected. It shouldn't be. I'm going to just make sure that has disappeared for sure. Forget device. Okay, right, it's definitely gone. I'm going to reset my Bluetooth. Okay, and now yes, now it's definitely gone. So in theory, that being the case, what I should be able to do is now go into Feiyu-Settings, and I should be able to choose SPG Live. So within the Feiyu-Settings options, you've got various things that you can actually do. You've got all these buttons down on the bottom here. We've got reset, sleep, reverse, panning, tilt. Now these are the modes. These are basically the equivalents of tapping the button a certain number of times. So if I wanted to, for example, do a pan and tilt mode, that would be a double tap. I just do that, and that means that the camera should follow, or the gimbal should follow my motion and lean forward when I lean forward. If I go back into just panning mode, the horizon should stay locked, and when I lean forward, it doesn't move at all, which is exactly as it is. So that's basically a kind of quick way to control it. Now you sort of say to yourself, well, if you're not using the camera, then why would you be using this? Now I'll talk about that in a moment as to why this could actually be quite useful. But you've also got a jog shuttle in the middle. This is your joystick, and this joystick functions in the same way. So if I go left and right, it's doing up and down because obviously it's rotated around, but this controls the movements of the joystick. You've also got the ability of pressing this if you do firmware. If I just tap on that, I don't think there's any firmware available, nope, but that will check and download firmware. I haven't done a firmware update via that method yet, so I can't tell you whether or not that works flawlessly, but it is the option that is there. You can also go into settings. There we go, and you can change motor speed, so you can actually make your motors a little bit more aggressive or a bit slower. You can change the follow mode settings in terms of where the dead zones are, and also how fast it will follow. So if you want to speed your motors up a little bit, if you're doing something sporty, you want to make it nice and quick. If you're doing something like maybe vlogging, you want to make it a bit smoother, you can change the settings in there. You can do the tilt rocker. Now I have to admit, I've had problems with this. It just doesn't connect. It just gives me an error every time. I will report that that to Feiyu-Tech, but so far I've just not been able to do that, so I can't tell you what the tilt rocker option does. But you've also got restore to factory default, so you know it's a handy little app. Now, one thing that I wanted to say about this is that this is something that you look at it and you say, well, you're using the camera, you won't be wanting to use this app. Now that's absolutely true, but what you can do, and I'll show you this in a moment, is if you wanted to, you have a second device, so a second phone, a second tablet, anything that's got a Bluetooth connection, what you can do is you can put this device into app mode, and rather go into the Feiyu ON app on the device that's actually in the gimbal, you go into the Feiyu ON app that's on your secondary device. And what that means is you can then control the gimbal and the joystick and everything literally using that second device. So I'll show you that right now. Okay, so a quick demonstration of how you can use a secondary device to control the gimbal. What you have to do, the prerequisites are you have to have this gimbal in app mode. You've got to make sure it's in app mode. This cannot be paired to the device, so nothing can be paired to it. Likewise, the secondary phone or tablet can't be paired to it. And then all you've got to do, once you've got that, you've got to have the Feiyu-Settings app on the other phone. So now that's the case. Bluetooth has to be on this, but you must not pair it. I'm going to say that a million times over. So we now go into Feiyu-Settings, SPG Live, searching for the device, connected, and now you will see if I use this joystick here, I can actually operate the gimbal remotely. So a handy little feature, something that you might want to consider if you were, say, doing a stage performance. You could put the gimbal away from where you're actually standing, so you could have it at the front of the stage and you'd be able to control it manually. If you're going to do that, you're definitely going to want to turn the sensitivity settings down, because it's very, very sensitive at the moment. But it's a really nice touch, and it's something that you can't actually do on the DJI Go app, for example. So this is definitely a step up from Feiyu-Tech to be able to do that. Whether it was deliberate or not, I'm not entirely sure. But ultimately it does work. I have tested it, and yeah, it's quite good fun. Now you can't use the Feiyu ON app in that mode. I have tested it, it doesn't work, so you'd have to use your standard camera, and you've also got to bear in mind that you won't be able to control the shutter because you're not paired to the device. Now it's possible, and again I haven't tried it, but maybe if you had like a Bluetooth shutter button, you could pair it to the phone independently, and then you'd be able to use the app. So that might maybe work. I might give that a go, but at the moment as it stands, that's just a fun way of being able to control the device from another phone. Okay, so now let's go into the other app that Feiyu-Tech offer you, which is Feiyu ON. So this is kind of their equivalent to DJI Go. Now, a little caveat, you have to be in app mode. So that is to say, when you turn the device on, you need to hold the joystick up, press the on button, that will then boot in. All of the literature and videos so far from Feiyu-Tech are completely incorrect as far as I found out. You don't wait for the light to flash red and blue. It will never flash red and blue, and it will not remember what mode you're in before, even though they say that it will. So unfortunately, just a classic case of miscommunication on Feiyu-Tech's part. And again, I will do a video after this one which will show you how to do this, so people who are struggling can hopefully learn the right way and get theirs working properly. Anyway, this is the Feiyu ON app. Very simple. It's controlling your camera. You've got a shutter button there, so if you press on the camera, it will take a photo. If you press that there, it will start video. This will control your photos, so if you want to go into your photo stream, you go into that. This is just a full screen mode, so it will just literally take away some of the icons. You've got the options for your flash on or off. Literally, it's just going to turn the flash on or off. I don't know if you could see that, but it did it. That's the selfie. Obviously, that will rotate to the portrait camera. And then you've also got the settings button. If we just have a quick look in the settings, what's nice about this is it will tell you your iPhone capacity, your gimbal capacity in terms of how much battery. It'll tell you how much space you've got on your phone, and it will tell you whether you've got firmware. If you go into the firmware update, you can see what firmware version you're on. It will tell you whether there's a new version available and allow you to install it. I have to admit I haven't tried that. There's the user guide, but they haven't actually finished that yet. And then you can also change the resolution from your camera. So bear in mind, if you've got an iPhone 7, currently you can't go into 4K on this at all. I believe on the iPhone 6 I can go up to 60 frames a second. It defaults to 23.97, which is a little bit strange. It's supposed to be 24 frames a second, of course. And of course, you've got the option of turning a grid on or off. So they're the settings. And then also the most important one, we tap on video and you've got some various options here. So you've got video, night, selfie, pano and smart. Now night mode will literally just whop the exposure up a massive rate. If I do that, you'll see what I mean. Everything goes very bright, very blurry, so the exposure goes up. And if we go to selfie, there you go. Now selfie, it flips it round so you can see yourself, and it goes into the kind of the narrow screen mode. If we go to pano, now what panoramic does is panoramic will actually control the gimbal. So the idea is that you've got now the shutter button has turned to a panoramic mode, and we can actually see it in action. If I then say take a panorama, boom, it will go to all the constraints there, and it will take a photo, stop, take a photo, stop, take a photo, stop, take a photo, stop, take a photo. Then it will spin back round and it will generate a panorama. Now, not a very interesting panorama of my rather messy review table, but a panorama it will be nonetheless. It does take a little bit of time to stitch it all together, and you can't actually see it unless you go into the photo options, and then you can see it's taken them. So a bit blurry and a bit bright, and it has to be said, not too bad. It does a reasonable job of stitching together. What I'll do is I'll take some proper ones and I will demonstrate what they look like in a moment so you can see them. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go into the one that's going to interest most people, which is the smart mode. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip this around to face me. There we go. And I'm going to hit track. And what that's going to do is it's literally, as you can see, it's drawn a red box around my face and it is now following me. So if I move around behind the camera, you can see that the gimbal will actually keep hold of my face. So in many respects similar to DJI Go. The difference is, of course, DJI Go you actually draw around the face, so you can draw the object. Now that's great because you can draw around other objects. So if you're filming, for example, a quadcopter in flight, you can draw around that and it will follow it, whereas the Feiyu-Tech app, it literally just uses kind of facial recognition to follow it. Now what will be interesting to see, and I may try a test later, is what happens when you put two subjects in frame, whether it will cope with that, whether it's going to try and do it. In theory, you know, my hands aren't getting in the way, it can tell that my face and it's recognizing facial features from it, so it's doing a pretty reasonable job. And it has to be said that, you know, the motion is fairly smooth. I can move quite far back here, and if I disappear behind this cupboard then it will lose me, but if I come back in it picks me up quite quickly and it will follow me all the way through. So just a quick demonstration of what the follow mode, or the track as they call it mode, is like in this app. So the final mode that I wanted to show you was the whole reason this is called the SPG Live, and that is because you are supposed to be able to put it into portrait mode. Portrait mode is useful if you're using things like Facebook Live or WeChat, for example, where a portrait video will show up without bars or anything like that, just in the general kind of flow of the feed. So to make it go into this mode, all you have to do, turn it on like I've got here, and you just tilt it to an angle of about 30 degrees plus and a single tap, and you'll see what will happen is the gimbal will spin around, and the whole idea is that you now hold it like this. Apologies for the thing on the bottom, that's the only way I could keep it standing up whilst I'm doing the video, but yeah, so the idea is that you can actually hold it like this. Now when you're in this mode, the only mode of the others that works is lock mode, so I can lock it, say, on that camera there, click once, and now if I try and move around, the gimbal won't move. If I single tap again, it comes out of that mode and now it's panning and following my motion, but it won't tilt forward, so you cannot do the over the bridge look in this mode, for example, and if you triple tap it won't turn back around. So bear that in mind, and if you want to actually get it back into the mode, you go back to this kind of motion, press once, and the landscape mode will return. So again, one of those little functions that may or may not be used, you know, certainly within the UK. I know WeChat is used a lot in China. Facebook's quite handy for it, but you know, it's one of those options. If you want it, it's there for you. If you don't, you'll never need to use it. But you know, it's worth demonstrating just because this is the SPG Live and it's supposed to be used for that purpose. Okay, so with all the bench testing done, let's get out into the real world. This is my usual route that I go through a bridge, I go down a road, I do a bit of walking, just to give you an idea of what the stabilization in the real world will be like. Now obviously we're not testing the camera is the iPhone 6 on this. Obviously it's going to differ from phone to phone. But what we really want to keep an eye on is how well this thing stabilizes, whether it twitches, whether it moves about in ways that we don't want it to. And anyone who hasn't bought a handheld stabilizer / gimbal before, the most important thing is the horizon lock. The thing that makes it feel the most stable is the way that it holds that horizon lock. So all you need to do is look at the line of the horizon, and when you pan around you want to see whether or not the left hand edge is lower or higher than the right hand edge, and if it is higher, how long it takes to kind of come back when you point the camera forwards. It's fairly obvious when you see it happen. If I do notice it on this video, generally speaking, I'll try and point it out to you, but it has to be said, from what I can see of the footage that I've taken on this, it's doing it pretty good. Feiyu-Tech have been getting better at this. You can see, like for example right there, I swing very quickly from left to right and it keeps a very, very flat horizon, and that's something that they used to suffer from. Certainly the gimbals of old from Feiyu-Tech, they had some real problems with roll drift, but it's nice to see that even with a very heavy phone in a heavy case that's slightly, you know, maybe heavier than most people will be using, it copes very well with it. The motors cope well, you don't get a lot of motor noise. I've dulled the volume down on this particular video because there's quite a lot of wind noise. Understandable, I'm on a bike, I'm riding along, the wind is blowing at me. But ultimately it does seem to do its job quite consistently. Now you can see I've just flicked it into mode 2, so I'm now panning down, so we're just kind of getting a feel for what the footage is like. Now I think personally that this copes very well with it. This is probably one of the best examples that I've seen. The Feiyu-Tech Summon, that was actually pretty good for the camera that was included, you know, and encompassed as part of it. And likewise the G4S, that was a good example. I would say this certainly in terms of stabilization is well on par with previous Feiyu-Tech products of the last year. Like I say, the Summon, the G4S, they're definitely on par with that, and refreshing to see that that's working well for this gimbal. So this was an interesting experiment that I was able to do, whereby I've used the iPhone's digital zoom to go all the way in. So obviously it's grainy, it looks terrible, but what was nice is it really gave me a good indication of just how stable the horizon was. You can see that green band, which is in fact a field, that is staying nice and firmly stable. Now there is a little bit of wobble, but considering I'm zoomed all the way in using this digital zoom, there's no major wobble that you would get maybe with holding a video camcorder and zooming all the way in. Now granted, this is a digital zoom, there's an element of stabilization that the iPhone will do for it, and you're not really going to be using it particularly at that kind of level, but it does prove that if you were to use, say, an optical lens on the phone, that the gimbal would hold it still, it would hold it stable, and that would allow you to get some nice kind of zoomed in footage compared to just using a normal camera or your phone and just holding it in your hands where it's kind of wobbling all about. So quite useful there. And at this point in the video, what I actually was playing with was the joystick, just to see how sensitive it was to my thumb movements. Now, just like the Summon, I have to say this slidey joystick in its default settings is very, very sensitive. You can't get smooth tracking shots. It's very hard to kind of slowly pan up to the left or up to the right. The good news about this though is you can go into the Feiyu-Settings app and you can turn the motor sensitivity much further down, put a negative figure in it, and that does give you a lot more control over the motions on the joystick. So now we move on to a little bit of footage of me walking along with the SPG Live. Now it's worth noting at this point, as it always is with a handheld gimbal, is that they will do all the work to stabilize the horizon and keep things nice and smooth, but the one thing they can't do is compensate the bounce that you get when you're walking along. You can see as I'm strolling along here, there's a certain up and down motion to it. You can kind of feel the motion of my hand as I'm walking, and that's simply something that can't really be compensated for without something like a Z-axis that DJI did for the Osmo. Problem being that that makes it an absolute nightmare to carry around. It makes the gimbal itself 3 times bigger. You've got to fit the camera itself remotely on the end of it, and you know, unless you really need that super smooth stabilization, it's just not something that at the moment is practical. I'm hoping in the future there will be a sensible and clever handheld solution for it, maybe using magnets or something like that, but as it stands at the moment, it's just something you have to live with, and you have to kind of train yourself to compensate that bouncing motion out. Now, one thing at this moment I want to pick up on is the fact that there is a lot of left and right movement. Now, one thing I found with this gimbal, which is a bit of a shame, is that as you're walking along, filming, you'll find that every now and again, if you tweak your hand left and right, it will kind of spin the camera. There's like a dead zone. Now, it's not always obvious when it happens, but it's something that, me being very, very picky on these gimbals, it did make me wonder whether that was going to be something that needed to be solved with firmware. You see a shot like this where I'm deliberately moving my hand, no problem at all, there's no issue with that, it copes with that, the horizon stays pretty stable, no major problems with it. But what I was finding was when I was actually just walking in a straight line, what would happen is every now and again I just twist my wrist ever so slightly, and because of doing that, the camera would all of a sudden just move and jerk to the left. It just did it there, for example. If I'm just walking straight now like this, you'll see that it does it again in a moment here, just there. It's nothing to be really worried about, but it was something that I did notice was happening quite often, and I think it's basically that there is a bit of a dead zone right in the center axis as you hold it, and that is something that you just need to be aware of whilst you're filming. So we saw the Feiyu ON app in use on the bench, but I wanted to test all of the various functions and features out in the real world as best I could. Now, starting with the Pano mode, this is the panoramic view mode. So it's a photograph that will be taken across 180 degrees, and we saw on the bench the way that it does this. You press go, and what it does is it swings the camera to the left, it will take a photo, move slightly to the right, take a photo, move again, take a photo, and then it has internal software that stitches all of this together to come up with the panoramic photo. Now, anyone who owns a modern day Android phone or a modern day iPhone know that the internal camera has a setting like this itself, both of which usually are very, very clever and very, very effective. What's interesting about owning a stabilizer to do this is that it takes out the concern of you moving around too much. This thing is tilting across 180 degrees on a fixed motor point, so it should be very good at doing it, especially if you are using a tripod to make the sweep, much like I am on these photos that you see in front of you. The big problem, however, is Feiyu-Tech really need to do some work on this. You can see some very, very obvious banding in the way that the photos are actually stitched together. Now, when you actually get up close, you can see that the stitching itself, in terms of where one photo ends and another one begins, isn't actually too bad. The big problem, however, is it seems that the exposure taken on each photo differs so much that you can see some very, very, very obvious colour changes. In comparison, if we take a look at this photo, which was taken on the top of Vesuvius using exactly the same phone, this is the standard iPhone panoramic mode. Now you can see that the iPhone software just makes such a good effort of putting all of these photos side by side, stitching them together and making sure that the exposure is barely even noticeable between them, even when sweeping across light all the way into dark. And unfortunately, it's a bit of a shame to see that Feiyu-Tech haven't worked more on trying to get that stitching better themselves. Granted, there are definitely some improvements in the future that Feiyu-Tech could do using simple app updates, but I think this is an area that they're really going to need to concentrate on. Unfortunately, technology like this is no longer just about the hardware, it's also about the software, the interface and the ease of use with your phone, and this is where DJI and the Osmo Mobile have stepped in at a very, very good level, as well as a very competitive pricing point. The other problem that I found with the app is a lack of a time-lapse mode. The Feiyu Summon, for example, was able to sweep across 180 degrees at a specific time interval and take photos so you could get a nice time-lapse. Now that was a really nice feature, if not perfectly executed, but unfortunately with this device there's no such thing. You can see the quality of time-lapse you can get with just the standard iPhone 6 time-lapse mode. Now all I want to have the ability to do is to be able to put my phone in this mode on the gimbal and say I'd like this gimbal to rotate 180 degrees over a certain amount of time. It would give excellent results, but unfortunately that's something that's just lacking within this software so far. Now that leads me on to the track or the face track mode. As you can see from this example, when I get outside into an environment that's got a lot of difference between light and dark, it just doesn't seem to cope too well with it. It will pick me up when I get quite close to it, it would draw the red box around me, but then I'd get panning, it would follow me, and then it would lose me instantly. Now whether that's something to do with the exposure on the camera, whether it's something to do with the extreme lights and darks, I'm not entirely sure, and I did seem to have better results when I used the rear facing camera compared to the front facing camera. Now unfortunately it felt to me like the software was a bit buggy, and indeed this kind of leads me on to the Feiyu ON app in general. Unfortunately, it just doesn't feel polished. I had a number of occasions where it would just drop me straight out into the home screen, and that was on both the iPhone 6 and the iPhone 7. I had occasions when I'd enter the face track mode and it would just draw a red box around my face and it would never follow me at all. I then had to disconnect from it, I had to reconnect to it, then I'd go into the app and it would work 100% fine. I'd sometimes go into the panoramic mode, it would take the photos, it would do the 180-degree sweep, and then it would just drop out into the home screen and I'd lose that photo. So unfortunately it just doesn't feel particularly polished. Now this leads me on to the conclusions about the gimbal in terms of whether or not this is in a good place for you to buy it, or whether or not you should think of other options before purchasing it. The positives of this product really lie in the hardware itself. It's very well made, it's well constructed, well manufactured, and it feels nice and solid in your hand. It also gives excellent stabilization. I haven't had any fault really in terms of the horizon lock, and it does feel that when I put my iPhone into it and I get recording, it gives me good results, which is exactly what you want out of this hardware. The issue, unfortunately, as I mentioned, really more comes within the app and the application, as well as the support that you get with the Feiyu-Tech product. It is a crying shame that the videos and the manual that comes with this device are basically incorrect in terms of setup for you to be able to use the Feiyu ON app and the Feiyu-Settings. Now, we've seen that there's a few glitches and bugs in it. I think from what I can tell, the Android versions of the apps are a little bit more stable and solid, and I think that's purely for the fact that Feiyu-Tech have only recently got into the iOS development side of it, and it may simply be a case of over time this will improve, and that's something you need to bear in mind. For every device that comes out, there are always going to be updates for it, and I think with the SPG range continuing, it means that if you buy this product now, you won't regret it, purely for the fact that you've got a perfectly usable handheld stabilizer that you can use just with your own iPhone, use the shutter button via Bluetooth pairing, and if you want the funky features, there are some there. You just need to be aware that they're not necessarily always going to work 100% of the time perfectly. The other important thing to consider, of course, is pricing point. If you buy directly from Feiyu-Tech, it will cost you about $239, which is about 188 UK pounds. If you're looking to buy the DJI Osmo Mobile, you'll be looking between £275 to £320. So with that said, there's a £90 to £100 difference between the two devices. Now granted, I do believe that the Osmo Mobile has a bit more polish to it, and it has a few features that are very nice, including motion time-lapse, but if you're a person who's just looking for nice stabilized footage from their mobile phone, something that's easy to carry, that you can stick in a camera bag and just have available to you should you wish to, then there's no denying that the Feiyu-Tech SPG Live comes highly recommended. I mentioned before that most of the negatives with this product come within the app. Now the good news about that is that the SPG, the SPG Plus, and indeed the G5 are all new products that Feiyu-Tech are going to be releasing over the next month or so. Now why that is good is because all of them use the Feiyu ON and the Feiyu-Settings apps. That means that Feiyu-Tech will have to continually do bug improvements, they'll continually have to support and add new features to these, and that means that anyone who's got an SPG Live should be able to benefit from that as well. Anyway, hopefully this video has been useful to you if you're considering buying the SPG Live. I will make some further videos in regards to the Bluetooth modes, and please look below the video for a link to Freeway, who are the European distributors of Feiyu-Tech products. Thanks for watching.